welcome to On the House, where we talk about movies, TV shows, and video games, because hey, whatever we want to talk about's on the house. Joining me as always is Dave,
Hi, everyone.
and our host for the night, Lynette.
Hello.
Well, folks, it's Lynette's pick, and it's our first Western on the show. And it's needless to say, we have opinions divided on Westerns. Some of us love them, and some of us aren't really fans of them. So, Lynette, why don't you take it away?
All right, so today we're talking about Rio Lobo. It was one of my favorite John Wayne movies as a kid. The reason I picked this one was because it was pointed out to me by my mother that it was a really bad Western, but at the time I did not understand what on earth made it any worse than any of the other Westerns that we had in the house. I grew up watching a lot of Westerns and I really loved this one, and I was hoping that maybe you guys would be able to illuminate what was so bad about this one. So let's start off with the sort of uh, where we're all coming from on this whole westerns thing. I know I grew up with a lot of westerns, a lot of Clint Eastwood, a lot of John Wayne. So how about you, Dave?
Well, I've seen the second American Tail movie,
Oh my word, not the worst thing, I suppose.
and they did show The Searchers in one of my courses back at university.
I love that movie.
Never seen that one.
I don't think you'd particularly like it. You're not supposed to root for John Wayne in it.
Oh wait, John Wayne's a bad guy in a movie?
It's a very smart made film where you don't realize at the start of the movie, wait, our hero is actually a terrible person.
I mean, to be fair though, Off is one of my favorite games, and that's the same concept, so maybe I would like it. But I
Yeah,
mean, who
maybe.
knows? I'll look it up sometime.
So yeah, this is basically the second movie I've seen that featured Marion Morrison.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's his real name, they say.
Oh,
And as for me, I'm a big Western fan. I wouldn't. I don't know. With Westerns, I kind of go back and forth on if they're a genre or if they're a setting. That's kind of an old debate. Because just within Westerns, there's so many subgenres that it's almost, you could say, it isn't even a true genre. It's just a setting itself and a time period. Now, if that classifies as a genre, that's completely up to you, but some of my favorite movies are, in fact, Westerns.
well, real quick, just to sidetrack, Jeremiah Johnson, is that a Western or is that just a Western setting?
That's a Western.
Oh, okay. All right, so we're coming at from a few different places on westerns. Like I said, I grew up on westerns, but I didn't actively seek them out. Clancy probably has an encyclopedic knowledge of westerns at this point. Um, so, what were you guys' general thoughts on the movie? Like I said, I absolutely loved it growing up, and I thought it was hilarious and just so much fun. But how about you guys?
Well, for this podcast, I'll be playing the Lynette to your Dave.
Well,
Like, the first thing I asked Clancy after I was finished watching this is like, since you're the one with more experience, I had to ask, please tell me the genre's not all like this.
so mean. Oh man, you guys are like gonna kill the child in me or something by the end of this, aren't you guys?
We're not going to try to ruin anyone's childhood. We're just going to be giving our honest opinion.
My word. Oh gosh, I gotta brace myself. All right, keep going. I'm sorry.
I mean, just like, I thought the best scene in the movie was pretty much the very first one, and John Wayne was okay in this, but just it went on so like slow paced, and
Really? It seemed slow paced to you?
I got to kind of agree with him there.
Oh, okay.
As for me, Rio Lobo is actually part of a trilogy. It's directed by Howard Hawks. It's actually the very last of his films, which if you don't know who he is, do a quick Google. He's your favorite film director's favorite director. He's inspired the likes of Steven Spielberg, Quentin Tarantino. In fact, Quentin Tarantino pointed to this film as an example of why he only wants to make 10 films and then stop, because he doesn't want to work past his prime and kind of put out a so-so Western like this one is. Martin Scorsese took huge influence from this man. This man directed Rio Bravo, Bringing Up Baby, Sergeant York, and the original Scarface. So these are classic movies. These are greatest of all time movies. And yeah, this is his last film and wasn't exactly the highlight to go out on. So for those not familiar with it, the original film he directed was Rio Bravo, in which John Wayne plays a sheriff who has a drunken deputy. And then a few years, and they have to hold a bad guy in a prison cell. And it's basically them holding out against these waves and waves of attackers. Now, about 20 years later, they remade the movie as El Dorado, only this time the sheriff's the drunk. John Wayne's playing his old buddy who kind of comes in to help him get sobered up and gets caught up in the mix. But they also added elements of humor and just John Wayne's aging at that point. So just kind of these themes of you're not going to be the youngest, fastest guy anymore. And then for this particular film, they remade it one last time. Didn't quite stick to the original concept as much. There isn't a sheriff that's a drunk or a deputy. In fact, when John Wayne was approached to make this film, his first question was, "So do I get to play the drunk this time?"
See, and I didn't actually even know that this was part of a sort of trilogy until you mentioned it to me. I'd never actually seen Rio Bravo or El Dorado, so
That is a
I guess
mistake that
I'm
you
watching the
need to
worst
fix.
version of this. I like, which, yeah, but like I said, to me, like even just rewatching it now, I still thought it was really great, and I didn't really understand what was so different about this versus the other westerns, and so. Yeah, so let's, get to the deep dive part of this, and you guys can illustrate what exactly was wrong with this film, because I thought it was great.
So, first off, I do want to say the opening scene of the movie, that was great. That scene is legitimately
Yeah, the
a
train heist.
yeah, that's a legitimately a well-paced, well-shot scene.
And I think I read actually that wasn't even Hawks who directed it. It was the second unit director.
Yeah, it was the second unit who actually directed it. So, part of the problem with this film, it had a lot of behind the scenes issues. First off, Howard Hawks at this point was very uninterested in the movie by the time it came to finally shoot it. So, a lot like the opening scene was actually done by the second unit. And second off, while filming this film, John Wayne's mother passed away,
Oh.
and his brother was dying of cancer and would pass away a month after he finished filming. So for me, as a John Wayne fan, I can tell he's kind of distracted throughout the entire movie.
And I think I read he was actually was suffering from an injury, so he was just less active in this one, like because he couldn't do as much.
Yeah, that makes sense, which is weird because the films he did before and after this, he's definitely more active, but it definitely does make sense.
I guess I did notice that he's not quite as like as mobile or as active in the other movies, but I'm not really the type of person who notices acting quality. I'm the type of person who gets so caught up in the illusion of a film that I just get that I just like uh, I don't get swallowed up in it. So
Hmm. But we should probably do a very brief outline of the plot before we go much further. So the film, it starts out with in the Civil War, John Wayne's the leader of the Union cavalry, and his payroll's robbed by some Confederates who later capture him, and then he turns around and captures them back. Which this film actually has an element of old westerns with that fact, because once they get out, he's kind of like, okay, no hard feelings. they kind of become friends with each other, and that's definitely a holdover from westerns around World War One, where there was very much a conscious theme in movies with westerns to kind of be like, hey, World War One's happening. We're still arguing about the Civil War, something that we totally aren't doing anymore. Let's try to move past this and work together. So I did find that interesting to just see that theme carried forward so late in the genre, because this is about 50 years after that idea was kind of played out.
It's weird that you say that idea is played out because I kind of grew up on the concept that the easiest way to win a man's respect was to fight him. Like that's like what my dad said that they used to do in school is that if you want to win a guy's respect, then you have a brawl with him, and then that's
It's
you.
I'm not so much talking about the fighting. I'm so much talking the Union and Confederate soldiers
Right, but
fighting each other, and
the
then
same
soon as the war's
concept.
over, we're best
They
friends.
the same concept though, like he took him down, they took him down back, and then they had that sort of mutual respect afterwards after competing with each other. I just thought that was kind of a guy thing. I was raised to think that that was a pretty normal thing with guys.
We now return to the Questionable Morals podcast.
Wait, why is that a questionable moral? What is what's questionable about? Well, okay, now that I say it, like picking a fight as a way to earn respect, but like in context, it makes sense.
So, one issue I had with this that it dawned on me halfway through is that I was asking myself, okay, so who's the antagonist supposed to be? Can they just settle on one?
Yeah, that's part of the problem with the movie is at first you think it's going to be because John Wayne wants to work with these guys because like his basically adopted son was killed when they robbed the payroll, but he didn't hold it against them because it was in an act of war, but the people who gave him the information was a traitor. Those people he wanted to see go to prison and hang.
Well, he wanted to
And
see
they
him like court-martialed or something with the army, right? He wanted the army to punish them for
yeah, pretty much.
traitorous action or whatever.
Yeah, but that thread's dropped like halfway through. You see him basically kill one of the guys early on, not knowing it's him. It's kind of a classic Western in self defense moment.
Yeah.
And then later on, you find, hey, this other guy's also one of them.
Well,
But
I
they
mean,
kind of drop the he's responsible for killing my kid angle at by that point.
well, no, because they sent darn, what's his name? Frenchie. They sent Frenchie out to go get the army so that they could come back and find the guy because they were going to court martial him. But Frenchie didn't make it. He got caught, so they
And
have
just my
to.
interpretation of that theme is more so that they sent Frenchie to get backup than necessarily just the court martial the guy.
Well, I don't know. I thought it was specifically because they found that guy. Because remember when they find him and he recognizes him, he says, "Oh, you know, something major so and so," because he changed his name at that point, and he recognizes him as some kind of an officer in the army, and then he punches him out and he says, "This one's for darn, I forgot the guy's name, the guy that died from the bee stings from jumping out of the train, the guy that he was, you know, trying to get justice for." Like he says his name, says this is for him, and he punches him out and punches him out, and then he says, or and then he, you know, and then they take him back to the jail, and they tell Frenchie to go get the army so that they can have him taken away. So I mean, I thought that was, I don't know, I thought they kept the plot line pretty true. Not that I was able to really follow the plot line when I was a kid, but you know. But you guys, earlier you said that the pacing was slow, which I found super weird because I thought they changed scenes quite a bit, like to the point where I feel like the pacing was. I mean, it is a lot to keep up with, especially with like so many different antagonists and so many different uh characters all showing up. It seemed to me that the pacing was pretty fast. What made you guys say it was slow?
So I would say my issue with the pacing is it's not set up well. There's certain scenes that drag on for no apparent reason. Because I believe you're at roughly the 40-minute mark before you actually make it to Rio Lobo.
Right, because the Civil War scene, and then Blackthorn.
Hmm.
Okay.
I mean, for me, it almost feels like the first half hour is an extended prologue.
Yeah, it definitely has that feel. And then it's like the second half, it goes at a much quicker Cliff Notes version. That's kind of why I couldn't really get into this
Like, I
one. It's
definitely get that. Like, the second half of the movie starts progressing a lot quicker, a lot of new characters, a lot of stuff happening.
yeah, and it's like with the new characters, you don't really get to know any of them.
I mean,
Yeah, it's
the
not nearly as
one
well
thing
as the remade ones, anyways.
the one thing I did like was like the drunk dad of one of the like two.
That was great. With his like near instrument.
And just how he rigged that
There,
one
anyway, to
shotgun.
make you stop that. I'd stop for a drink. I love I love that guy, and like is just how crazed he was, and he was so anxious to kill that guy who was snatching up all the land, the traitor guy.
See, I didn't really get too much of a kick out of him because that same role was played by Walter Burnham in the original Rio Bravo and then in El Dorado. I've seen that character done before and I saw him done in ways that I thought was just, well, better, you know?
Yeah, that's fair. And I haven't seen the other two movies, so who knows? Maybe if I'll watch those and I'll realize, wow, I never need to watch Rio Lobo again. Um, and I remember talking to you earlier about this and mentioning that like I really loved the humor in Rio Lobo, and then you said, well, El Dorado is actually a lot funnier, and I was like, oh, okay, because I thought the humor was for sure the saving grace of Rio Lobo. I thought it was hilarious.
I mean, I did get a kick out of the part where John Wayne is trying to fake going to the dentist when he asked for information.
I
Oh,
did get a
yeah,
kick out of that.
that was great. And he like shoots him with that one thing. He's like, "Hey, that's the real stuff." Well, if you were a better actor, I wouldn't have to use it.
I will give props to that one scene. That was indeed a good scene.
See, and I thought the most hilarious scene, my favorite scene when I was a kid, is that part where the lady she refuses to sleep on the Indian grave, and so she ends up spooning next to John Wayne's character, and he wakes up and he's like, "Hey, what are you doing here?" And she's like, "Well, I don't know. You're comfortable." And he says, "Comfortable? I've been called a lot of things, but comfortable." That was my favorite scene as a kid. It was hilarious.
Uh,
Really?
I
Nobody
mean,
else
it's
thought
a
that was
fine
funny? Only
joke for
you?
me, but it's like it's a fine joke, but for me, part of the problem is I've seen El Dorado and a lot of the jokes just kind of feel like the leftovers.
Oh,
So while there are good jokes here and there, there's far more misses than there are hits for me.
I can get that, I guess. I'll probably get it a lot better after I see El Dorado.
Watch Rio Bravo first.
Okay, okay. I will watch Rio Bravo first, and then I'll watch El Dorado.
You're welcome. So some more interesting behind the scenes stuff with this is, oh boy, was there quite a bit of conflict on the shooting of this, particularly with the main actress, Jennifer O'Neill. So when she was cast, she was just known for her bit parts here and there. Well, apparently, when she got cast in a John Wayne movie, it went to her head. And she was very difficult to work with to the point where the director, Howard Hawks, ended up cutting a vast majority of her scenes just because he got so tired of working with her throughout the film.
Wow.
Which actually explains quite a bit because like she's set up to be this major character and then she kind of just disappears.
Yeah, you know what? I did kind of notice that. I did kind of notice that she faded out, which is a kind of a bummer because I liked her character and I like that she kind of busts Frenchie's chops a little. It's pretty funny.
Yeah, she
I
starts out
notice
to
that a lot more now that I'm older.
be your typical Howard Hawks women who he was known even for back in the 30s, 40s for having very strong, self-assertive women. He was very much a progressive in that sense, where at the times a lot of them were, tee hee, I'm just a girl.
Yeah, she comes off as sort of a damsel in distress at first, I think, and then well, she continuously sort of it's not terribly overt, but there's like certain things where Frenchie is just like, "Do you even know how to ride a horse?" And then she's like, "No," and then hops on and then does like a little like spin with the horse just to show off like
Yeah, I mean, like, there's elements of her starting to be a character, and then they just kind of disappear.
I thought from what they did keep though, I thought they still made her into a decent character. She just wasn't a main character.
Which is the problem when she's supposed to be the female lead of the film.
And
Now
another
that
behind the
is,
scenes.
I would have never guessed that she was supposed to be like a lead or a female lead because I mean, she's definitely an important character, and I really enjoyed her. But it seemed pretty obvious to me the whole way through that it was going to be the three main guys, simply just because those were the guys who were in the prologue, in the Civil War prologue, and so it's like, of course, you know, these are our three main characters, and that's how it's going to be through this whole movie. And
Well, here's the thing. In billing, she got billing above the Mexican actor who played Frenchie, George Riviero. He was apparently a huge star in Mexico already,
oh,
but when they brought him over, he kind of struggled with English a little bit. They actually had to teach him how to say each one of his lines, which, considering that, I think he did a pretty decent job.
I mean, I did notice that his accent was really thick. I didn't really notice that as a kid. It didn't really occur to me. But when I watched the movie this time around, I was like, wow, that is a really thick accent.
And now you know why.
I also read that apparently they constantly didn't have extras, so oftentimes one guy's army would just have different people between scenes.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of a behind the scenes bit on John Wick, where they start everybody off as being super hairy with long hair and thick beards, and just because they were on such a tight budget, they'd give the guys a haircut, and it's like, okay, now you're a goon in this scene. So by the end of the movie, everybody they're fighting is bald.
Get progressively less hairy in the movie? That's hilarious.
I mean, obviously they don't shoot scenes in order, so it's not a perfect lineup, but
Okay, okay. That would have been so much more funny though if just like if just throughout the movie you notice, hey, these goons are getting less hairy with each scene. I don't know. I've never seen John Wick, so that would have been so funny.
And also, this film has another thing going back to the pacing is that it just kind of stops at the end. Like,
yeah, I was going to mention that there's no real wrap up. There's the guy who I guess they decide the main villain is dies.
Yeah, the
And
sheriff, the
yeah,
dirty.
and then there's like no conclusion for any of the characters. Just all right, he's dead.
I thought that was the conclusion. The evil sheriff is dead. The guy who was stealing everybody's land wrongfully is dead, and now the town can go back to normal. Like I don't know how that isn't a conclusion.
It's very abrupt. It's most films would in this setting show the characters. Okay, this is how the town's starting to get back together, as opposed to this one just kind of gunfight and done.
And with what you
Have I
described with
just have
how
I
it
just
ends,
never noticed that in all the other westerns I've seen, or am I just watching all the westerns with abrupt endings?
I think either you just haven't noticed or you're watching all the ones with very abrupt endings.
I mean, I've never been much for noticing. Like I said, I don't really notice acting quality. I don't really keep track of pacing or cinematography and that kind of stuff in the first place. But wow, it just seems so weird that I would be so blind to that.
and also with how we described the ending, it made me realize this movie, it basically just shifts what its plot is halfway through.
It honestly does it a couple times, it feels like. Which part of that is probably due to the fact that there were several screenwriters hired and fired throughout the making of this film.
It definitely has like quite a few. It has some twists and turns. I think more than it doesn't so much change plot lines as it just adds them. Though I think it adds like 2 or 3 plot lines in the last, half or third of the movie as it goes along.
Yeah,
Wrap
I,
up nicely again, though. I thought.
mm, I just disagree with you there. I think that's going to be ultimately our conclusion from this, that we disagree on this particular movie.
Yeah. Well, at least
I
I
feel
have a
like,
better understanding of why, though. It's considered one of the lesser of the of all the westerns that I've watched.
Especially when you consider the film he did right before this was True Grit.
Oh, I love that movie.
Yeah, that's when you consider he made True Grit, and then about 2 years later he made The Cowboys, and a few years after that he made The Shootist.
Can't stand the Cowboys or the Shooters, but that's just because they're too sad. So it's nothing to
But
do with
you
quality.
have to admit they are some of his better made movies.
They were really well made, which is part of the reason, which makes it all the more worse. Because if it's a sad movie and it's made really well, then it's like, oh, that just makes it more sad, and I hate that.
Yeah. So it's just kind of like it's a for me it's just a forgettable John Wayne film, which nothing against the guy you star in over 275 movies. Not all of them are going to be classics, you know?
Yeah.
and also with going how that first scene on the train is so epic, and honestly, the idea of being trapped in a train with hornets is a legit creepy concept. But I just feel the action scenes weren't like as big as what the opening set up.
Yeah, I got to agree with Dave there. I do consider the opening like a legit, if they were to remake this film, keep that scene as similar as possible. But yeah, it's like the gunfights later on are just gunfights I've seen before, especially they don't even take advantage of one of the main premises is there's people holding out in the jail. So there's supposed to be this feeling of claustrophobia and just building tension throughout. And since they change locations fairly regularly, you never get that feeling of the outside world caving in on them.
Oh, that is a good point. You're right. You don't really feel that sort of tension you're supposed to feel when you get bunkered down in some place. 'Cause
Mhm.
I've seen
And
that. I've seen that done in like plenty of films before, where it's like, oh, we're trapped in this one particular spot. But yeah, they did. They were pretty mobile, so it's you didn't really ever get that feeling.
especially you got to consider the first film that of the trilogy here perfected that.
Oh,
So it's like I said, it's one of the best westerns ever made. I'd have it in the top 10.
wow.
So it's very hard for me to go from that to this. I believe last episode I used this comparison. I'm going to use it again. It's like having two bands. One's your local metal band and one's Metallica in the 80s. There's just not really comparing it. They're both told to do make a song based on the same lyrics. and the local band might do a fine, serviceable job, but the other one's Metallica.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Although in this instance, it was made by the same guy, but still, the analogy makes
All right. One's Master of Puppets Metallica, and the other one is Saint Anger Metallica.
I was about to ask, like, does Metallica have like a badly received album that you could use as the like comparison?
I could act that it's actually the perfect comparison.
Yeah. And also, just one thing I want to ask, like, and I'm not trying to mean this like as an insult, but one thing I noticed was, do westerns usually, especially bigger studio releases, did a lot of them have as like little like moments with music as this one did?
No, this one was kind of. I mean, think about something like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, which has the iconic. Or it used to be back in the 20s, there were the singing cowboy. Music used to be a huge part of the Western genre. Like, it was one of the pioneers of sound. So I wouldn't say the score was bad. I just didn't notice it in this.
Well, I'm not even talking about how like if it was bad or not. Just like, is it normal for westerns to have like this many scenes without a score?
I didn't even notice that there was a lack of music. It didn't really occur to me. Am I really this dense when I watch movies?
Why do I feel like this podcast is
man.
slowly turning into Lynette realizing things about how she watches movies?
No, I don't want to realize it. It's gonna ruin watching movies for me. I like being caught up in the childlike wonder. It's just like like what do I even notice about a movie if I don't notice the acting, I don't notice the music, I don't notice the pacing, I don't notice the cinematography, I don't know. I don't notice the plot. What am I noticing?
The
The
random
vibe,
side
the vibe.
boob scene.
I like
Notice
the
the
vibe
title
of this
cards.
movie. What'd you say?
I said you noticed the random side boob scene.
Wait, there's a side boob scene?
Yes.
Okay, well I didn't notice
Apparently,
that.
you don't notice the
No,
random side boob scene.
oh wait, you mean okay, wait. You mean when Frenchie walks in on that chick who's naked or half naked?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I noticed that. Okay.
That's one of the films that's one of those moments I've used in the past that's just gratuitous, where it's like no reason for her to be topless in that scene.
I mean, I guess I kind of thought that it was part of the whole because there was there was some implication that Frenchie was kind of a womanizer or something when he pushes that one girl out of this room. And then like later on he walks in on the girl who's like half naked and it's just like, okay, so is this like some sort of character building thing for his character where we're supposed to assume he's like a womanizer now? And but it was weird. It was definitely weird.
Like I said, I feel like it's just in there to get your PG nudity in.
Which makes it all the more weird that it was one of my favorite movies as a kid.
And now Lynette's
But
going to start
fair, I didn't
questioning other
understand
things
what
about
was going
herself.
on, so.
Well, I mean, if we're gonna learn about anything, let's learn about ourselves.
I mean, fair.
Well, Lynette, as somebody who's gone to a lot of therapy, I can sit in for this. I've watched all of Frasier.
Oh my word.
How does this movie make you feel?
Is this the final thoughts part of the podcast?
It can be. I'm just screwing with you on that. For me, it's honestly kind of hard to talk about this one because there's two versions of this movie that are better. I want to keep talking about them, you know.
Yeah, I can tell you're like restraining yourself barely. And then poor Dave, who just doesn't care for westerns at all. Which I did not realize when I picked this movie. I did not realize until afterward that you weren't a big fan of westerns.
Like I said, we can still do an American Tale 2 one day, and I can talk a lot about that.
I'm sure we will. Besides, at some point, I want to do Unforgiven, and that's one of my favorite films, and there's a lot to unpack in that one.
It's also a good Metallica song.
This is quickly becoming the Make Reference to Metallica podcast.
It's the everything podcast at this point. The moral questions podcast, the psychoanalytical podcast, the Metallica podcast.
I wonder if this episode is going to be a fan favorite.
I don't know. Apparently, we're popular in Australia, so to the Australians listening to us, let us know.
Speaking of Australia, we ought to watch Quigley Down Under.
Now, that's a good movie.
It is good.
I say as the guy who named his dog Quigley, so you know.
That's right. I forgot about that. Well, did anybody have anything else to say? Any other criticisms?
Dave,
But do you guys have anything nice to say about the movie?
I mean, like I said, the train scene is legit a good scene.
Well, the sets were fine.
Yeah, it's like I could see how this could have been a good movie. It just, I don't think it came together.
I still maintain that it's a good movie. Just because it's not better than its predecessors doesn't mean it's not a good movie, but okay.
I mean, for me, I'm just kind of bored by it.
Ugh, I
Which,
don't know how you can be bored with all the new characters and plot lines they add immediately in the end.
it's kind of, they can't keep your interest with the ones they introduced initially. At some point, your brain just goes and off.
Well, how about you, Dave?
Are you asking for like my final thoughts or what?
Oh, I just asking whether or not you had anything else to say. Anything nice to say?
Well, the sets were nice. John Wayne, like he did fine. Like I don't have an issue with him, and I mean there were like those a few scenes I mentioned really liking, and
Yeah, I guess I shouldn't be so hard on this film just because it's not the predecessors. It's fine. It's a serviceable movie, but the way I think
Not my actual movie, honestly.
I think the way to compare this is something like Stagecoach or Hondo or one of the great John Wayne films you buy just for that film. While this one you buy as part of the 30 pack of films that they used to make all the time, you know?
Mm-hmm. Oh, they still make those, don't they? I still see them around.
I don't know. It's like the movie section in stores is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. While the vinyl section is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, which that last part I don't really have an issue with.
And yet I still can't find a record of Tom T. Hall.
That does confuse me. My advice, eBay.
Well, final thoughts then, everybody? A general overview?
I think before we do that, we need everybody's favorite section of what would we do in a remake?
Oh.
I would like take that opening train heist and make it the whole movie.
Oh my word.
Like you can get some really elaborate set pieces.
Yeah.
Like how the only good part of the 2013 Lone Ranger movie was the climax. Like let's do a feature-length version of that.
Yeah,
current century has not been good for westerns.
I like the prologue as a prologue because I think I think it serves its purpose. I mean, it is really cool to watch, but I think mostly it's about setting up these three main characters and their relationship with each other and stuff. And I really like it for what it is. But I guess if I did have to change some things, I mean, it would probably be to simplify the later plot lines, maybe condense them a little because it got kind of convoluted, and also maybe clarify a little bit more who the main villain is because that got confusing too. Um, and also, I guess what you guys mentioned about the music, if there was like a more iconic score or a theme song that was a little bit more obvious, like I know there was a theme song and I remember recognizing it as it came up, but it wasn't quite as memorable. Like I couldn't hum the tune to you guys like in like off the top of my head. So maybe a little bit more of an iconic score I think would improve it.
As for me, what I would do is part of the problem I think is they were trying too hard to stick to the format of group of people inside a prison trying to hold this one guy captive. What they should have done is just ditch that element completely, which I know would technically not make it part of the trilogy, but the trilogy was fine with two films. What they should have done is just make it kind of a manhunt movie where John Wayne and the two other lead characters are working together to find the two traitors. Make
Or
it,
That would have been really cool.
yeah.
or one thing
Especially
I
since you really love those types of westerns where they go cross country for stuff or like across a state or just some large expanse of
if
land.
I one thing I thought to ask, like, if I was doing a remake, I would make the search for the traitors be the focus of the plot more, and I'd also maybe like to make a point of Frenchie and the other guy saying they don't quite remember who it was. Like, I'd almost play the plot up as a who done it.
Yeah, that'd be, or
That's
like
just because you
throw
like
in an element of did we just kill the right guy?
Mhm.
That could be very interesting if they threw in an element of, well, he had white hair. Well, there's two guys in this town with white hair. Which one is it? And when they do kill the guy, like have that element kind of stay on the characters of did we just get the right guy or did we just kill an innocent man?
I feel like that's asking this movie to be a little bit deeper than it's supposed to be.
That is true.
I feel like I like it for the shallow movie that it is, I guess. Because I like shallow movies like on purpose.
Yeah,
So I feel like adding a little bit of depth would almost kind of take away what makes it fun.
and I can definitely see where you're coming from. I think for me, just the previous two versions of this aren't shallow, so for me, it's just I can't get out of that mindset of what this movie's should be because I'm comparing it to the previous two, which
Yeah.
it's a remake. So it's kind of justified why I'm doing that. It's just I can't break out of that. Not saying another person couldn't. I'm not capable of it.
Yeah.
So, final thoughts?
Well, for once, it was unique to be the one being the downer of the podcast.
Yeah, that's usually my role.
I mean, like,
Just
westerns are
consider
just
it just
not
consider
my
it
thing.
revenge for making me watch movies I don't like.
uh,
But like, I'm sure, like you guys, Clancy especially, like, there's probably better westerns out there, and I mean, it was competently made. Like, I just can't really offer genre-specific critique.
yeah,
Yeah.
for me it's just kind of it's a by the numbers western. If it's on in the background, it's not terrible like some of the spaghetti westerns were, but it's just it exists.
Well, like I said, when I picked this movie, I didn't actually know that you weren't into westerns at all. So if I'd have known that, I probably would have picked something that was a little bit more emblematic of the genre. But even so, like I said, I wanted to know what it was that I was missing, and also, well, the other movie that I wanted to do, The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, I really want to do when Matt's available. So I also didn't want to miss out on that. That was like his favorite movie as a kid, so we have to do it with him if we do it at all.
Oh, definitely. Well, folks, that wraps up this podcast. But before we go,
Well, Kiki wasn't here, and it was her turn to pick the next topic. We're sad she's not here. It's making us all misty eyed.
I like it.
Oh, that's good.
Well played, well played. And until next time, folks, just remember that you can find us on Instagram, our new Facebook page, which is actually the title of our series on the House Podcast Reviews and Podcasts. Instagram, Twitter, SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, and wherever else podcasts are available. And as always, I want to thank Dave and Lynette for being on the podcast.
You're welcome.
Yeah, no problem.
And we'll see you next time.
Hey guys, Clancy here. Just wanted to hop on and, record a new outro for this. It's been a little while since I updated the old one and just kind of wanted to talk to you guys more about where I'm at with my journey and just kind of what you can do if you're struggling as well, because I know a lot of people probably skip over this part here, but I don't do it for them. I do it for the one person who may need it. That's how I think about this. If over the course of 1,000 videos, one person listens to it, it's worth it to me, because at one point, I was that same person. So, little update, since the last time I recorded a message here, I've been officially diagnosed as bipolar, which for some I know that's a big scary thing, but for me personally, it's kind of a nice just knowing what I actually have, And guys, mental health doesn't have to be a scary thing. There shouldn't be a stigma attached to it like it is. And I pray one day that at least for our next generation or something, we're able to move past the stigma we have and get on to a better future for everyone. But in the event you're ever struggling, there is a number you can call. I'm going to have it showing up on the screen right now. And that number is 1-800-273-8255. Again, it's 1-800-273-8255. Guys, there's no shame in having to call that number if you need it. I've had to call it numerous times myself. I'm only in the last month in a place where I feel like they actually got my medicine right. So, just my words are, don't give up if you're struggling. There's going to be good days, there's going to be bad days. I mean, if you guys know something about bipolar mania, apparently I've talked to a couple people who are also bipolar, and the urge to shave your head is a real thing. So, that's why I've been rocking this look here lately. But anyways, you're gonna have your struggles, but the alternative of not getting help just isn't an option. Don't do what I did and wait 27, 28 years where I wind up in the hospital before finally saying I need help. Alright, love all you guys watching this. I'll talk to you soon. Bye. Hey guys, Clancy here. Just wanted to hop on and, record a new outro for this. It's been a little while since I updated the old one and just kind of wanted to talk to you guys more about where I'm at with my journey and just kind of what you can do if you're struggling as well, because I know a lot of people probably skip over this part here, but I don't do it for them. I do it for the one person who may need it. That's how I think about this. If over the course of 1,000 videos, one person listens to it, it's worth it to me, because at one point, I was that same person. So, little update, since the last time I recorded a message here, I've been officially diagnosed as bipolar, which for some I know that's a big scary thing, but for me personally, it's kind of a nice just knowing what I actually have, you know? And guys, mental health